Looking for a job? Looking for talent? You've come to the right podcast. It's time for another episode of Hiring You. Now, here's your host, founder and CEO of Ursus, John Beck.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to 2024 and season 3 of Hiring University. What better way to kick off our third season than to have Michael Beckwith from Xcel Energy. Michael is category manager of staff augmentation and corporate card and travel. I think there's some other things that got added to your list as well, too. We'll talk about that. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Tell us a little bit about Xcel and the program that you run, size, scope, countries, that sort of thing. Give our listeners a sense of Xcel and the contingent labor program.
Sure. So Xcel Energy is US-based energy firm operating in 8 states, has a few subsidiary operating companies, but we're in Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Dakotas, Michigan, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas. We are aiming to be the leader in the clean energy transition, hoping to reduce our carbon footprint and becoming carbon neutral by 2050 within all of our plants, from a generation perspective, and then from a fleet perspective, electrification of all of our vehicles. Really exciting company to be a part of. And if you'd have asked me a few years ago, would I be in the energy industry, I probably wouldn't have said yes, but definitely some really cool opportunities I felt like with the organization, just with respects to their contingent labor program and being able to apply some of the knowledge that I'd gained in previous roles and continue to build, learn, and have an impact in organizations, which is chief objective for me when I look at a job opportunity. Our program is operating in those 8 states, as I mentioned, about $100 million of spend, anywhere spend from about 650 to upwards of 850 headcount on the staff aug side. Outside of staff augmentation, there's probably about 12,000 or so professional services and consulting services, those types of outsourced external labor categories. I'm really focused on staff augmentation currently, but looking at expanding my role and scope to include some of those other categories in the coming years, and can give you some more detail if you want, but that's a good high-level overview of it.
You mentioned that you never thought you'd find yourself in an energy company, and now it resonates with you. Does it matter when you're talking, or I guess how often does it matter when you're talking to candidates or anyone that's interfacing with a company? How important is the mission? Because the mission is cool. Not every energy company is, as advanced or has made as much progress as you. Everyone talks the game, there's promises, but actually doing it. And you and I have chatted many times about the things that have happened and are planning to happen in a pretty aggressive timeline. Does it matter to people, or how often does it matter?
Well, I think in a large percentage of our candidate population, it does matter. Sustainability is becoming an increasing focus within the talent market, and finding people who are passionate about that and moving the needle and being a part of the change is really exciting. It's this interesting juxtaposition with an industry that feels outdated and antiquated in many ways, just technology stack, processes, heavily regulated, feels like it's quite slow moving in many ways. But, contrast that with, the EV vehicle trend, for instance, is a huge impact on us. And so I think there's a lot of people who are really interested in how are we taking something that is historically a slower moving industry and then applying some of those catalysts and really making an impact on not only the communities that we operate in, but globally in leading the way and hopefully influencing how other energy companies are making decisions.
Michael, let's talk about the current state of the market. And it'd be an understatement to say that there are mixed messages right now in the press. One day, if you read CNBC, you'd think everything is great and trending upwards. And if you read the press today and yesterday, inflation is still looming and there's a recession that could potentially hit us in the next 12 months. Is the market good? Is it bad? Is it too early? What's your sense of what's in store for us this year and next?
Well, I think the key pieces that you talked about were this piece and next. It's always about the context and the time frame. If I look at markets broadly, I like to just keep on zooming out until I see a favorable outlook. And I mean,
so you're an optimist.
Well, I'm an optimist, with humanity, with evolution, with where we've been going. If you zoom out of this year, the past 5 years or 10 years, and you start to look at overall markets, some of our indices like the Dow Jones and S&P, et cetera, you see that since their inception, it's just been upwards and to the right. We're making progress, and yes, there are going to be those corrections that we have to go through in order to re-establish our footing and to build. Right? It always is going to be those periods of somewhat like burst growth that happen, and then we have to settle back in, find some support, and keep on going. So the next year or two, I think, it will be more volatile than some expect. Election year, a lot of political things happening geopolitically, like even in the context of the last few weeks, announcing nearly $100 billion of funds to be allocated towards supporting Ukraine, and Taiwan is included in that mix, as well as Israel. So I think that just as a little bit of a leading indicator that we're going to continue to see in the big picture, right, a lot of volatility. But when it comes to talent, I'm actually still very optimistic, and in light of the fact that the market is relatively shallow, unemployment's low. But looking at like the Manpower Employment Outlook survey, they survey over 40,000 companies, and in the US, 35% of those companies are expected to continue hiring, and a good percentage of them don't really anticipate a change, meaning that there's still a high demand for talent. Yes, there are going to be challenges, but I think it's very favorable for our industry. So
to cut to the chase, you're hiring right now. Xcel is
yeah,
hiring. Good.
Yeah, we're hiring, cautiously. I think we're in the same mode that many other large companies are, right? We want to hire the right people. We want to find ways to bring efficiency to our work streams that, and favorably impact our shareholders, of course. And some of those decisions and strategies aren't going to be people. It's going to be process and optimization, AI, all those types of things that everyone's talking about. But yeah, we're still hiring, and I'm really excited about what we have in store for us these next couple of years.
And is the labor pool today shallow, deep? I guess it depends on classification. I know we talk to a lot of hiring managers that when they read the headlines of layoffs, they just make the assumption that there's a glut of talent sitting around looking for jobs, desperate for jobs. We would beg to differ with that. Good talent gets snapped up quickly. What's your sense?
Yeah, it varies so much by sector. I think in labor category is the honest answer. We're going to really struggle as a country, and we look outside of the country where we've been outsourcing for years, offshore, nearshore, those types of things continue to be, I think, firmly entrenched in most companies' people strategy. How do we look at other markets, because ours seems to be pretty strapped for talent, and we're not graduating as many people in professional skilled trades and things of that nature. So yeah, we're gonna have to continue to get creative, look at how do we engage these other untapped labor categories, whether it's independent contractors, freelancers, or nearshore, offshore, et cetera.
So it sounds like exhaust as many different channels to find talent, whether it's through professional services, staffing, vendors through your program, doing anything with direct sourcing or any of the newer sort of in vogue, hot, whatever they mean, avenues.
Yeah, definitely on the roadmap.
Yeah.
I feel like coming into this role, I knew I was taking a little bit of a step back proverbially when it came to where our program was at from an overall maturity perspective. But it was that opportunity, those gaps where we haven't implemented those types of strategies, where I was like, I think we can really make a favorable impact on the company by implementing some of those types of direct sourcing strategies, and updating our definitions and policies about, and our understanding about independent contractor usage and freelancers, and finding ways that we can do that effectively, within the context of the ever-changing legislation on that stuff.
And so let's talk about, because you hit on, I think you may even used the word worker classification. I was just at an industry event last week, and in every single breakout session and roundtable, regardless of what the intended topic was, it came back to worker classification and rogue spend. And how are you addressing it at Xcel? Because the themes that I continue to hear is everybody has a problem. Some are being more proactive because procurement cares and believes that there is not only risk, but also potential savings. Others don't think there is as much risk or enough savings to make it worth their while. What are you doing at Xcel, and what's your own personal outlook outside of where you sit today?
Yeah, so from a professional perspective and a personal perspective, I'm super passionate about data. And I think all of those conversations need to start with data. And if we don't have visibility into where these workers are, what they're doing, how much we're paying them, what contracts they're tied to. We can't really formulate a go forward strategy, nor can we appropriately advise our leaders about how to make decisions. And so I'm a huge proponent of building out data, both internally, but then, engaging third parties to help build additional credibility that are industry leaders and have gone through some of those conversations with various general counsels and different industries to help benchmark and understand where are we at. And some of those numbers that I mentioned earlier, 12,000 workers that are external labor that aren't classified as staff aug. I have to believe that a good percentage, I mean, some companies would probably say 10, 20% of those are probably staff aug, right?
For sure.
And so I think there is a lot of opportunity, as I always describe it, to revisit what are our policies, what are our definitions, how are we advising our business leaders to engage resources, and are we giving them the right advice? Are we equipping them with the right information and data points to make those decisions and help them understand the cost risk, the potential legal risks, better understanding co-employment and debunking some of those myths, which still linger no matter how much we've had those conversations. So
does it seem ironic to you, though, in the midst of arguably the biggest advances in data science and analytics and AI to propel that? I mean, saying that we don't know, we can't determine who's who in our program feels like a cop-out to me.
Well, it absolutely is. I totally agree. And that's where, when I look at how do you practically move the needle on this, it's hard work is the answer. It takes surveys of managers who have headcount and finding a tool that allows you to aggregate that data. And maybe it's building it, but most of the time, I think there are a lot of good options out there, whether it's in a context of a VMS platform or HRIS platform, however you're going to get that picture of what your human capital equation looks like. It needs to include FTEs. It needs to include staff aug. It can't just be those two. It also has to be your professional services categories, and then start to build out, this more holistic understanding of what is the cost per individual, per function that we're paying, and start to make those comparisons and see, are there inefficiencies that we can remedy by either a change in strategy, whether it's transitioning certain types of workers and labor categories, to professional services or to staff augmentation, depending on the nature of the work and what kind of transfer of risk we're looking for with those vendor partners. But, I think that really leads to one of my other big passions is relationships and having the right relationships with our vendors. So they're helping us and really giving our stakeholders and our supply chain organizations the right guidance on, hey, this type of project seems like it's actually staff aug. We should put this through staff aug. Now, it's going to be tough to find partners like that. We all know the margins are much better on professional services work, and they should be if we're transferring risk. But if we're not, then, having the type of partners who will call that out, I think they're going to be, in the long term, more successful, especially with the level of competition that exists.
It feels to me like we're nearing a tipping point because it is on everyone's lips. I mean, I literally every conversation I have, this comes up.
Agreed.
I agree with you. It's hard work, which is why there's probably resistance. It's about understanding. It's about where ownership lives within an organization and understanding who not only your external partners are, but your internal stakeholders are. But there's either going to be some legislation that's passed, or there'll be enough case studies. Like we had somebody at this last event who estimated there was $1 billion with a B spend that they could go reclaim and recapture, that it had hundreds of millions of dollars of saving. Their publicly traded company goes straight to the bottom line. Like that is significant. And I think the more this topic comes up and people see that there's a path to get there, and some people will play and some people won't, that it'll happen. But it's like the prevalence of this topic is like, it's everywhere right now. So I hope you're right. And I hope there are more companies that drive for it, selfishly for us, but also just for the industry, because the other people that suffer are the workers themselves that are getting misclassified and sometimes underpaid and, in occasion overpaid, not getting benefits. I mean, there's a myriad of things that are not being talked about that are impacting the individual worker.
Yeah, and I think that is a really often overlooked part of the equation is the worker experience and the expectations that are placed on workers. And in many cases, depending on how long a worker's been engaged for a company, they start to be increasingly feeling like they're part of the company, right? it's part of their strategy to always engage external labor for most large organizations. And so, how we treat those workers, especially when you're talking about the equity and inclusion components of the DE&I
Yep.
acronym, right? How do we start to bridge the gap between how we're treating those workers and including them in events and in company process that makes them feel more comfortable with their role and their function versus instigating unrest or dissatisfaction. And so as they're leaving an organization, what are the things that we're doing to mitigate those wrongful termination suits, and how are we partnering with vendors to answer some of those questions, I think is really important.
Yeah. More to come there for sure. Michael,
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about you. How did you get into this business? Very few people graduate from college or grow up thinking I want to get into contingent labor. What was your path to get here?
Yeah, I was really fortunate actually. My dad always encouraged at a young age to take advantage of the network you have. And in this case, I took advantage of his network. My dad was in the staffing and professional solutions business. He was working for Manpower Experis.
Awesome.
And so he had introduced me to his recruiting director, had conversation initially, but I was essentially looking for a replacement of income. I was bartending at the time. I was like, what's something that I can get into that's variable based on my performance, because I'm hungry, I'll go after it. Right. And so that's how recruiting was. It seemed to be this opportunity to learn more, first of all, and get paid for it, which is a key criteria of any job for me. And so you're meeting people, you're talking to them, you're having ideally, dozens of conversations a day with people who are doing jobs that may or may not be interesting, but it allows you to get more context to make decisions. And then as I progressed from recruiting into account management and started to learn some of the fundamental skills, so like sales skills around relationship development and communication, and I realized like those are the things that are really the through lines in all jobs, that you have to build those skills out. And so I was thankful to have the foundation from about recruiting and account management background to then become more involved with technology implementation in the form of direct sourcing with Thomson Reuters, and really had a great opportunity there to just continue to level up and get a little bit deeper into the contingent labor world. And you're right, it's not a common path that is advertised heavily, but it's a bit of a shame that it isn't, because great opportunity. I know so many people who have started off as recruiters and then maybe they end up in project management or business analysis or XYZ, right? It's a great starting point. And it also is a great career because, as we just discussed, this is not an industry that's ever really going to go away.
Yeah, ever go away and continually changing. So you think your time on the other side, dare I say the dark side, helped you in your roles today?
Yeah, definitely don't consider it the dark side, but I think it was absolutely formative and really helpful in just building the perspective that I have about how to run a program, how to treat vendors, how to treat people.
Yeah.
And, I look at the stakeholders that I work with as internal customers, and I look at vendors as, a part of that equation, and trying to find ways to really understand where are the goals that we have in common, and to find, opportunities to understand more about the people that I'm working with versus just what they do. And I think that's been really helpful, from the recruiting and sales start to my career, that really drove a lot of how I look at things from a philosophy perspective.
When you think about going to industry trade shows and events, what's the better or worse scenario, going as a representative of a staffing company versus as a buyer?
Well, I think my number one objective when I go to those events is to talk as little about staffing and contingent labor as possible. Just really do try to focus on how do I build relationships with the right people, so that, as I look to my future, we have the right types of more proactive approaches to relationships, whether it's with existing suppliers that I haven't met with, or with technology that we're going to be evaluating in the future. Look to just build relationships there. And I think that actually is pretty similar, or should be pretty similar, to how I would have approached it as a recruiter or account manager. But it definitely takes a lot of the pressure off of those types of events to walk away with, in the case of a salesperson, like walk away with leads or meetings set or some of those things. But I would say invariably it has the same outcome. I have new leads on technology partners who I'm
Sure.
interested in having further conversations or seeing demos with, or set up some meetings with prospective vendors that may be filling out a capability that, we're currently lacking, something like that. But yeah, always enjoy at those types of events a lot of the keynotes that aren't really focused on contingent labor and just much more focused on the human condition and the things that we all have in common.
Yeah. I think that's excellent advice for anybody attending those events. Good stuff. I know you're a podcast guy. Other than Hiring University, what's your favorite podcast and why?
Number one for the last few years has been Huberman Labs. Andrew Huberman, just a huge fan of the way that he approaches sharing information and education. Professor at Stanford, but it has done great podcasts, and they're usually a few hours long. So they just go into so much depth about the science of performance. And I mean, everything that we're dealing with that is I think relevant. Things that need to be discussed that aren't being discussed intellectually, or like, alcohol use and THC use and depression and anxiety and motivation, and talks a lot about dopamine and as it pertains to motivation. And so I've just learned so many things that practically have helped me become a better person, become more successful. So it's a great podcast if you haven't listened to that one yet.
Nice. We'll include that in the notes. And I'll give you an opportunity because you host your own podcast. Maybe give a shout out for your own program.
Sure. Yeah. It definitely was part of the process. And I wasn't originally super keen on doing a podcast myself, but I had a couple of really good friends who convinced me otherwise. So last year we started the Reclaiming Man podcast. And the sort of tagline is, we are trying to stop our sleepwalk towards extinction and reclaim some of the values and beliefs that our forefathers held that are timeless: integrity, honor, strength, courage. And in order to do that, we have to reclaim our minds, our bodies, and ultimately reclaim freedom. And so we explore a number of different topics. A lot of it is, I would say, similar to other content out there around self-help and growth and learning. But, from our perspective, from our story, it's the opportunity for us to chronicle our relationship. And so I think it's as much selfishly motivated as selfless, but really actually, enjoying it. We're coming up on our 50th episode. So we've worked out some of the initial kinks, but still have a ton of progress and ways to go yet as far as building it out further. So yeah, it's a great time we're trying to do the same thing I think that you are. Keep episodes a little bit more succinct, keep them short, to the point. And that's been enjoyable.
And as I understand it, you're looking through the lens of humans as members of the planet, not as members of the United States or some other country or political organization or religious organization. It's the universality of being human, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many things that transcend religion and humanity, and not humanity, I'm sorry, like that transcend religion to focus more on humanity itself. And to your point, there's so many things that can be divisive in our world right now. And it's finding ways to have conversations about those divisive things in a way that actually brings us back to what we have in common. And I think it's a big challenge, but it's also a responsibility that we have. We should use our freedom of speech to help unite people and help each other out, right? That's ultimately what I think the unintended or byproduct of our podcast should be. We hopefully are helping people ask better questions about their life so they can hopefully become better people, have more success in whatever they're pursuing.
I love it. And I love the name, Reclaiming Humanity. Well done. Last question for you, Michael. If I threw you in the Wayback Machine to the time that you graduated from University of Minnesota, go Gophers, what would you tell yourself today based on all the things that you've learned up until this point?
Oh, probably something really simple, just like read, think, and grow rich and apply every single concept.
Perfect.
Yeah, love Napoleon Hill. As a person, I know he kind of deviated off in some of his other work that probably isn't as, from a current perspective, isn't acceptable socially. But that book in particular really just it reinforced to me, as I read it a couple of years ago now, how important it is to think about our thoughts, to get into metacognition and to realize what are we thinking and how is it impacting our actions and outcomes. Really, one of the core tenets that I took away from it was we have to cultivate this burning desire for what we want to accomplish. And if we are passionate about anything in life, it will help us with making progress towards it. And that's what I consider success.
Nice. Michael, you are in the right profession being in the people business because you think about people and humanity, and it comes through in your comments and experience. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. Promise me you'll come back to the show and we'll compare notes in maybe a year or so. We've done that with some other guests along the way, but appreciate you coming on and getting to know you.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck with this year and the podcast. And absolutely happy to come back at some point, and hopefully can return the favor and get you on our show.
Would love to. Best way for people to get in touch with you? LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn probably it. I've took a little bit of a backseat on some other social media. I'm on Instagram too, but LinkedIn probably from a social network perspective is the closest thing that I have to social media.
Awesome. We'll make sure we post that as well too. Thank you again. For our listeners, as always, stay curious, stay hungry, stay safe, and we will see you next time on Hiring University. Thanks again.